It's tough to know where to start when everything you've known falls apart. Looking back, the day everything changed, the day everything started unraveling, was when I got that call. Cancer. Just hearing the word felt like a punch to the stomach. You always think it won't happen to you. You hear about other people going through it, but you never imagine it'll be your turn. I can still picture myself sitting in that cold, sterile doctor's office. The white wall seemed to close in on me as he told me. Stage 2 lymphoma. It didn't feel real. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just nodded along like I was listening to some mundane report. It was as if I wasn't even there, just watching from a distance. Isabella was beside me, holding my hand, her face twisted in concern. Her eyes were all watery, and she was whispering comforting words like, "We'll get through this," and "I'm here for you." At first, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We'd been married for more than 10 years. Sure, we'd had our ups and downs, but we were solid, right? Or at least, I thought we were. The first few weeks after the diagnosis were a blur of doctor's visits, consultations, and preparing for treatment. Surgery was coming up, and then chemo. I wasn't ready for how quickly everything started to fall apart. Not just physically, though that was brutal in itself, but everything else too. Our relationship. It's like the second I got sick, Isabella started pulling away. I didn't notice it right away. At first, I was too consumed with my own pain, too exhausted to pay attention. Chemo is brutal. It takes everything out of you. My body was a battlefield, and every day felt like a struggle just to get through the nausea, the fatigue, the overwhelming sense of hopelessness. I won't lie, our intimacy took a hit. I barely had enough energy to get out of bed, let alone be close to her. And I knew she noticed. We used to be all over each other. In the early days, we couldn't keep our hands off one another. Sure, that kind of passion doesn't last forever, but we had a good thing going. That is, until cancer came in and wiped out whatever was left. But it wasn't just about intimacy. It was everything. Emotionally, physically. I was a shell of the man I used to be. And instead of stepping up, Isabella started spending more and more time away. She'd tell me she had to work late or that she was out with friends. At first, I bought it. Why wouldn't I? She had her own life. She wasn't sick like I was. I didn't want to drag her down into the mess I was living in. But over time, I started noticing small things. Her phone was always glued to her hand. She'd get texts, and when I'd ask who they were from, she'd brush it off, just work, or just a friend. But something didn't sit right. The real turning point came when James showed up. Now, James is an old acquaintance. We weren't close, but we've known each other for years. I hadn't seen the guy in ages, and out of the blue, he shows up. At first, we just shot the breeze, talking about life, catching up. He knew about my cancer. Everyone did. Then, out of nowhere, he hits me with it. He says, "Ryan, man, I don't know how to say this, but I've been hearing some things about Isabella." I'll never forget the way my stomach dropped when he said that. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but inside, I was already spiraling. He rambled on about hearing rumors, about seeing her out with some guy a couple of times. He said he didn't want to believe it, didn't want to say anything, but thought I should know. I tried to brush it off, told him he must be wrong, but damn it, that seed of doubt was planted. After James left, I sat there staring at the ceiling for hours. I didn't want to believe him. I couldn't. She was my wife. We were supposed to be in this together, right? I was fighting cancer, for God's sake. How could she do something like this to me? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. All the nights she came home late, all the excuses, the sudden obsession with her appearance, hitting the gym, buying new clothes. Everything just clicked in that moment. I couldn't help but imagine the worst. I didn't confront her right away. I couldn't. I was still too weak, too drained. But I started watching her closely. The way she acted when she thought I wasn't looking. The way she guarded her phone like it was something precious. My mind was constantly racing, coming up with all these scenarios. Was she really cheating on me? Or was this just some side effect of the chemo and stress messing with my head? In the end, I couldn't stand the doubt anymore. It was eating me alive, almost as much as the cancer. I didn't have the strength for a big confrontation, not yet, but I knew I had to find out the truth. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. I know it sounds drastic, but by then, I didn't trust her. I needed answers. This guy, Victor, he was a real pro. Calm, seasoned, and honestly, a little too good at digging up dirt. I told him everything. The late nights, the sudden absences, James's warning. Victor didn't ask many questions. He just nodded and said he'd take care of it. And that's where I'll leave it for now. I still didn't have proof. I still wanted to believe I was wrong, that maybe James misunderstood something. But deep down, I knew. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. After James's visit, everything changed. I tried to shake off what he said, tried to convince myself it was all just some misunderstanding. But that seed of doubt? It took root. Suddenly, I couldn't ignore the things I'd never paid attention to before. Every little thing Isabella did seemed suspicious, like my mind was rewired to overanalyze everything about her. She was out a lot more lately. I'd ask where she was going, and she'd give me the same old answers. Work meetings, catching up with friends, some other excuse that I'd once just accepted without a second thought. But now, every time she left, my stomach would churn, and my mind would race with all sorts of thoughts about what she could really be up to. I couldn't help but start focusing on her phone. She was always on it, constantly texting someone, always busy. If I ever asked who it was, she'd wave it off like it was no big deal. Just work, she'd say with that smile that never reached her eyes. But I knew something wasn't adding up. The whole thing came to a head one night during one of my chemo treatments. I was in the hospital, feeling like I was falling apart. My body felt like it was about to give up on me, and the drugs running through my veins only made it worse. I tried calling Isabella, just wanting to hear her voice, needing some comfort. But she didn't pick up. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. I sat there, staring at my phone, hoping for a text or at least a missed call. Something. An hour passed, then 2. When I finally got her on the phone, she sounded irritated. "I'm busy, Elliot. I told you I'd be out tonight," she said. Busy? I was in the middle of fighting for my life, and she couldn't even pick up her phone for a minute? That was when I realized. It wasn't just her being distracted or stressed out about my illness. There was something else going on. After that, I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. I had to know what was really going on, no matter how much it hurt. So I called Victor, the private investigator. This guy came highly recommended. He specialized in finding out the truth when it came to cheating spouses. The moment I met him, I could tell he wasn't someone who wasted time. He sat across from me, stone-faced, while I told him everything. The late nights, the coldness, the warning from James. He didn't react, just listened carefully, then assured me that if there was something to uncover, he would find it. He told me to keep things normal. "Don't let her know you're suspicious," he said. "You don't want her to know you're onto her. Keep everything like it was while I dig into things." So that's exactly what I did. I kept playing the part of the clueless, sick husband while Victor worked in the background. But it wasn't easy. Every time Isabella walked out the door, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the time she was meeting him. And it wasn't just the thought of her with another man that was eating me up. It was that she could do this while I was in the middle of the hardest battle of my life. The coldness of that kind of betrayal, it just destroys you. The days dragged on. I was still going through treatments, still fighting the cancer, but my mind was split in two. Half of it was focused on surviving, the other half trying to piece together the truth about Isabella. It felt like I was trapped in two different hells. And then, after what felt like an eternity, Victor called. "We need to meet," he said, his voice calm, like this was just another day for him. My heart sank. I knew this was it. When we met, he didn't waste any time. He laid everything out in front of me like I was sitting in a courtroom. Photos, reports, timelines. Isabella had been seeing someone else. His name was Liam, a married businessman she'd met through work. They'd been meeting up at a hotel, usually on the nights she said she was working late or hanging out with friends. I stared at the photos, trying to wrap my head around what I was seeing. There she was, my wife, walking into a hotel with some man, smiling like everything was just fine. And there was Liam, some suit-wearing jerk who probably thought he could get away with anything because he had money. I wanted to tear those photos to pieces, burn them, anything to make them disappear. But I couldn't. This was my life now. My wife was cheating on me while I was fighting for my life. Victor didn't stop there. He kept giving me details I didn't want to hear but knew I had to. Liam was married too, had a wife and kids. They'd been sneaking around for months, maybe longer. Victor couldn't say for sure when it all started, but the evidence was enough to make me feel like I was going to choke. I didn't know what to do at first. Part of me wanted to confront her right there, yell at her, demand an explanation. But Victor told me to hold off. "Let me keep digging," he said. "There might be more." More? I couldn't even process what he'd already found, and now he was telling me there might be even more? I felt like my head was going to explode. But Victor was right. If Isabella was capable of this, who knew what else she was hiding? I had to be careful. I had to get all the facts before I made a move. So I did what he said. I stayed quiet. I kept pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was breaking. Every time Isabella walked through the door, I had to stop myself from confronting her, from calling out her lies. I'd watch her go about her day like everything was normal, and it took everything in me not to lose it. I kept thinking about all the times I needed her when I was going through chemo, when I was too weak to even get out of bed. She wasn't there. Not really. She was busy. And now I knew exactly what she'd been doing. It made me sick to think I ever believed her. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to know just how deep her betrayal went. So I waited. Victor kept digging, and I kept pretending. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about her cheating. This was about survival. I was fighting for my life in every way imaginable, and I wasn't going to let her win. Not now. But the worst part? I still loved her. Or at least, I loved the woman I thought I married. The woman who was supposed to stand by me through sickness and health. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And I had no idea what was coming next. All I knew was that I had to be ready. I thought finding out about Liam would be the worst of it. I mean, how much worse could it get, right? Your wife is with some rich, married businessman, and that's as bad as it gets, isn't it? But no, I was wrong. I couldn't have been more wrong. Liam wasn't the only one. A couple of weeks after our first meeting, Victor called again. I'd been trying to hold myself together since then, barely making it through each day. Chemo was still wrecking me, and mentally, I felt like I was walking around in a haze, knowing that Isabella was sneaking off to hotels with other men while I was stuck in a hospital bed, puking my guts out. It did something to me. Something broke inside that I don't know will ever fix itself. So when Victor called, I was already on edge. He said we needed to meet again, that there was more to tell. More? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. But I knew Victor. If he said there was more, it was never good news. We met at the same quiet cafe, the one where we wouldn't be interrupted. Victor sat down, calm as always, and slid a folder across the table. "There's more," he said, his voice flat, confirming what I feared. I didn't even want to open it, but I knew I had no choice. The first photo I saw was of Isabella with another man. But this wasn't Liam. No, this was someone else, some muscle-bound guy in workout gear. "His name's Ethan," Victor said. "He's a fitness trainer at the gym your wife's been going to. They've been seeing each other for months. It's more than just gym sessions. They've been meeting at his apartment, too." I couldn't believe it. A gym trainer? Really? It felt like some bad soap opera, but this was my life. I stared at the photos. There she was, my wife, leaning into him, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world, like I didn't even exist. Victor laid out the timeline, how she started hitting the gym right after my diagnosis, claiming she needed to stay fit to cope with the stress. Yeah, right. Turns out, it wasn't just about working out. She'd been going over to his apartment while I was stuck in bed, too weak to even get up. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to yell, to scream at the top of my lungs, but I couldn't. I just sat there, numb, staring at the proof of her second affair. It felt like everything around me was falling apart. But then, Victor dropped another bomb. "There's more," he said, his voice unwavering. I looked up, feeling lost. More? How could there be more? Liam, then Ethan. What else could there possibly be? Victor pulled out another set of photos. This time, they weren't taken at a gym or some sleazy hotel. No, this time they were from a wedding. Our friend's wedding. The one we went to together, where we danced, laughed, and took photos with everyone, pretending like we were the perfect couple. I remember that day so clearly. Isabella looked incredible in her dress, and I felt lucky to have her by my side. Or at least, I thought I did. In the photos, there was another man. A younger guy. He was the wedding photographer. Some artsy-looking kid with a camera slung around his neck. His name was Jackson. I remembered meeting him briefly that night, thinking nothing of it, just another guy doing his job. But apparently, he'd done a lot more than that. Victor explained that the affair with Jackson started that night at the wedding while I was mingling with our friends. Isabella had been cozying up to him. They exchanged numbers, and before long, they were meeting up behind my back. How bold was that? To hook up with some kid at a family event, surrounded by our friends, completely oblivious. I stared at the photos of them together, my stomach in knots. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the humiliation. She hadn't even bothered to hide it. She was cheating with someone who had been right there in our circle, in front of everyone. It made me feel like a fool. How had I been so blind? Every new revelation shattered me further. First Liam, then Ethan, and now Jackson. It wasn't one mistake. It wasn't one lapse in judgment. This was a pattern. Isabella hadn't just betrayed me once. She'd done it over and over again with different men. While I was focused on surviving, on battling for my life, she was out there satisfying her own needs. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The weight of it all was suffocating me. I'd always been someone who tried to see the good in people, who believed that, deep down, we all had good intentions. But this was pure selfishness, pure deceit. I'd never felt so alone in my life. I sat in silence for a long time, trying to process everything. Victor didn't say anything after that. There was nothing more to say. He had done his job. He'd uncovered the truth, and now it was up to me to figure out what to do with it. But I had no idea where to start. How do you even begin to move forward when your whole world has just been shattered? I thought back to all those times during chemo when I felt like I was on the brink of collapsing. How I called out for Isabella. How I begged for her to be there for me. And where was she? With Ethan? With Jackson? With Liam? Anywhere but by my side. The truth hit me like a freight train while I was barely clinging to life. She was out there living her life as if I didn't matter. I had been fighting for us, for our future, while she was busy sleeping with other men. It made me sick to my stomach. I wanted to hate her. God, I wanted to. But instead, all I felt was emptiness. Like something inside me had died. Maybe it had. Maybe the version of me who believed in love, loyalty, and commitment was gone for good. But one thing was clear. I couldn't just sit back and let her destroy me completely. I wasn't going to let her win. I had to figure out my next move because this wasn't just about surviving cancer anymore. It was about surviving her betrayal. And I wasn't going to let her break me. Deep down, I knew the real battle was only just beginning. There's a point when you stop being the victim. When you decide you're not just going to take the hits anymore. When you realize it's time to fight back. After learning about Isabella's 3 fucking affairs, I knew that moment had come for me. I wasn't just some dying guy anymore. I wasn't going to be the one who just took it. I was going to take control of my life again. Of everything. That's when I called David. David's been my friend since childhood. We've been close for as long as I could remember. Running in the same circles, staying in touch even when life pulled us in different directions. Lucky for me, David ended up becoming a lawyer. A damn good one, too. I knew that if anyone could help me sort through this mess, it was him. When I called him and told him what was going on, he didn't hesitate for a second. "We'll handle this," he said, his voice steady. "She'll never see it coming." That's exactly what I needed. A quiet, strategic approach. No loud confrontations, no drama. I didn't want Isabella to have any time to react, to twist things in her favor. I wanted everything to happen behind the scenes so that by the time she figured out what was going on, it'd be too late. David and I met the next day. We found a quiet spot, a cafe tucked away where Isabella would never think to look. I laid it all out for him. Liam, Ethan, Jackson. The trifecta of betrayal. David didn't flinch. He'd seen worse, he said. But for me, this was the worst. The woman I married, the one who'd promised to stand by me through thick and thin, had been sneaking around with other men while I was fighting for my life. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Maybe I never would. Here's what we're going to do, David said, laying out his plan. We start by transferring the ownership of everything. The house, the cars, all of it. She won't know until it's all set in motion. Can we even do that? I asked, feeling completely out of my depth with all the legal talk. David gave a small, almost amused smirk. Elliot, she's been running around behind your back for months. You're sick, and she's been neglecting you. The courts will side with you if it comes to that. But we don't need to wait for her to make a move. We'll make sure you're in control before she even realizes what's happening. I trusted David completely. From that moment, everything started to fall into place. I began quietly gathering everything we'd both signed: mortgage documents, car titles, the investments we'd made. Isabella had no idea what was brewing just beneath the surface. She was still distracted with her late nights, her work meetings, completely unaware that I was preparing to pull the rug out from under her. The legal process wasn't easy, though. Physically and emotionally, I was drained. Chemo had worn me down, and the mental toll of discovering her lies was nearly too much to bear. Some days, I didn't know how I'd make it through. I couldn't focus on anything beyond the pain of it all. But David kept me focused, reminding me why I was doing this. You need to protect yourself, Elliot. Don't let her take everything. She doesn't deserve it. The hardest part was pretending that nothing had changed. Every day, I had to sit across from Isabella, watch her go through her routine like nothing had happened. While I knew what she had done, there were moments when she'd sit next to me on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through her phone, probably texting one of those assholes. I had to stop myself from grabbing it out of her hand and smashing it against the wall. But I couldn't let her know. Not yet. One night, I remember lying in bed, pretending to sleep, while she came home late again. She slipped into bed next to me, and I could smell the faint scent of cologne on her. It wasn't mine, of course. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing, picturing her with him, with them. I wanted to scream, to throw her out right there, but I couldn't. I had to stay calm, stay focused. I couldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing I was onto her. It was in those quiet moments that I found unexpected support. Emily. We'd known each other for years, part of the same circle of friends, but we'd never been close. That all changed when she found out what I was going through. Emily had gone through something similar. Her husband had cheated on her a few years ago, and their divorce had been brutal, but she'd come out stronger, and she was there for me when I needed someone to talk to. Emily didn't hold back. She didn't offer empty words of encouragement. She didn't tell me to stay strong or keep my chin up. No, she told me to get angry, to stop wallowing in self-pity and start thinking about what I needed. Don't let her take everything from you, Elliot, she said one night over drinks. You've already lost so much. Take back what's yours. Her words lit a fire in me. They gave me the strength to keep moving forward. Some days, I'd sit in David's office, feeling like the weight of the world was going to crush me. But then I'd think of Emily's words, and I'd picture Isabella's face when she came home late, thinking I didn't know. That thought pushed me forward. David and I worked closely together to make sure everything was in order. He helped me transfer the house into my name, move our savings into a separate account, even change the beneficiaries on my life insurance. Each step felt like I was reclaiming something for myself. Isabella didn't suspect a thing. I played my part perfectly, acting like the sick, clueless husband while behind the scenes. I was pulling every string I could to secure my future. Finally, everything was in place. David had done his part, and I was ready to file for divorce. We decided the best time to serve her the papers was when she least expected it. No warning, no drawn-out fights, just a clean break. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. Even after everything she'd done, part of me still held on to the woman I thought I knew. But that woman was gone. I had to accept that. The morning I planned to serve the papers, I looked in the mirror and saw someone different. Stronger, yes. Maybe colder. But not the man I used to be. Cancer had taken so much from me. My health, my peace of mind. But Isabella? She'd taken more. And I was about to take it all back. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel victorious. If anything, I felt hollow. But I knew this was the only way forward. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival. I wasn't going to let her destroy me any longer. The papers were served that afternoon. Isabella wasn't home when the process server came, and I knew she'd be blindsided. She'd come in, probably expecting another round of lies and half-truths, only to find her world flipped upside down, the same way she'd done to mine. It felt almost like a cruel twist of fate. Life has a way of doing that. Here I was, finally recovering from chemotherapy, starting to regain my strength. My hair was coming back. My appetite was slowly returning. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was a glimmer of normalcy. But while I was getting better, Isabella was the one starting to fall apart. It started subtly. I remember how she'd complain about headaches, stomach aches, all these little things that, honestly, I just couldn't bring myself to care about. I mean, after everything I'd been through, the months of chemo, the hell I endured both physically and emotionally, her whining about feeling tired or off barely registered with me. I brushed it off. She didn't care when I was vomiting uncontrollably in the middle of the night from the chemo. Why should I care now? But it didn't stop there. She started staying in bed longer, complaining about how she couldn't keep food down, how everything made her feel sick. Part of me thought maybe, just maybe, this was guilt catching up with her. You'd think someone who had betrayed their spouse like she did might feel something, right? The weight of her actions finally sinking in? Or so I thought. It wasn't long before I found out the truth. One night, after weeks of hearing her go on about the flu, she broke down and admitted it. I still remember how it happened. We were sitting at the dinner table, though we hadn't shared many meals together lately, and suddenly, she started crying. It was the first real emotion I'd seen from her in months. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. She wiped her tears and said, "I need to tell you something," her voice shaky. Her hands trembled as she wiped her face. I just stared at her, waiting for whatever she was about to say. "I've been sick," she said. "I went to the doctor, and they found something." I didn't even blink. "Found what?" I asked, my tone cold, flat. I had stopped caring about her well-being a long time ago. Her next words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I cared about her health, but because of how darkly ironic it all was. "I have an STD, she said. "I got it from one of them." She didn't have to tell me who. It didn't matter. I knew. Liam. Ethan. Jackson. One of her lovers had left her with a gift, and now she was dealing with the fallout of her reckless, disgusting choices. I could barely suppress the bitter laugh that wanted to rise in my chest. She sat there crying, pleading for sympathy, and all I could think was, this is karma. While I was battling cancer, struggling for my life, she was out there sleeping with God knows how many men. Now, as I was finally starting to recover, she was the one falling apart. It was poetic justice. Turns out, the infection wasn't something simple. It had spread, causing all kinds of complications. Her treatment was going to be long and painful. She didn't say it outright, but I knew she was scared. For once, she was facing something she couldn't just run away from or sleep her way out of. After her confession, there was this moment where she looked at me, waiting for something. Comfort, understanding, anything. But I just sat there, stone-faced, staring at her, completely detached. "I'm sorry, Elliot," she whispered through her tears. "I made a mistake. Please, let's try to work this out." And that's when I knew. It was time to end this nightmare. Once and for all. I leaned forward, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "It's too late for that, Isabella." I reached into my bag and pulled out the stack of papers I'd been holding onto for days. Divorce papers, the evidence, everything. I slapped them down on the table, watching her face drain of color as the shock set in. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "That," I said, my voice as cold as ice, "is your reality now. I know about Liam. I know about Ethan. I know about Jackson. I know about every lie. Every time you sneaked out while I was sick. Every time you slept with someone else while I was in a hospital bed. And now, it's over. Everything we owned is mine. The house, the money, all of it. You signed away your rights to it without even realizing it." She sat there, stunned, flipping through the papers, her face losing all its color as the weight of my words hit her. "But how?" she stammered. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction as I watched her crumble. "You never saw it coming, did you? This was my moment. My victory. I had regained control of my life, every piece of it. She was powerless, and for the first time in months, I was the one holding all the cards. Naturally, she tried to plead with me. Elliot, please. I was confused. I made mistakes, but I love you. We can fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't even flinch. Love? You have no idea what love is, Isabella. If you did, you wouldn't have thrown it all away. You destroyed everything, and now you have to deal with the consequences. Her desperation grew, her voice louder, more frantic. She begged me to reconsider, to give her another chance, to save our marriage. But I'd heard enough. I stood up from the table, looked at her once more, and said, "You're on your own now," just like I was. Then, I walked out. You'd think that would be a moment of triumph. You'd think I'd feel some overwhelming sense of victory after everything she put me through. But the truth was, I didn't. Sure, there was a cold sense of justice, seeing her unravel, knowing she was going to face the consequences of her choices. But it didn't heal the wounds she left. It didn't erase the months of pain, the shame, the endless lies. It didn't fix the broken pieces of my heart and mind. In the end, I didn't feel like I'd won. I'd taken back what was mine, sure, but revenge doesn't undo the past. The scars were still there, raw, deep, and maybe they always would be. Isabella was out of my life now. Legally, emotionally, financially, I was free from her grip. But the cost of that freedom? It was steep. And no matter how much I wanted to feel like I'd come out on top, part of me knew I'd never truly recover what I'd lost. The cancer might have been gone, but the damage Isabella had done was a different kind of wound, one that wasn't going to heal easily. After the divorce, I expected to feel relief, to feel like I was breaking out of a cage. But instead, it felt like standing in an empty field, with no idea of what comes next. Once Isabella was gone, all I had left was time, and a mess of emotions I didn't know how to sort through. So, I did the only sensible thing. I sought help. That's when Emily entered the picture. She was my therapist at first, helping me with the aftermath of cancer treatment. I didn't just need to recover physically. I was carrying emotional scars that ran deeper than anything the chemo had done. Emily helped me untangle the wreckage, patiently listening as I vented my anger, my hurt, everything I'd been holding in for months. She never judged me. She just guided me, showing me how to deal with everything. What began as a professional relationship soon turned into something else. It wasn't immediate, but one day, I realized I wasn't just looking forward to the therapy sessions because they helped me heal. I was looking forward to seeing her. We both knew the boundaries, but we eventually crossed them. Emily stopped being just my therapist and soon became much more. With her, everything felt different. No lies, no games, just raw, unfiltered honesty. She saw me at my lowest, and she didn't walk away. We didn't have the kind of wild passion I once had with Isabella in the early days, but what we had was real. Slowly, we began talking about a future, one that was far from the pain of the past that nearly destroyed me. We decided to leave it all behind, to move to a new country. I needed to escape everything that reminded me of the life I used to have, and Emily was willing to start fresh with me. So, we packed up and moved to a quiet, small coastal town. Nothing fancy, just peaceful. A place where we could rebuild, far from the wreckage of our old lives. The move wasn't just about changing scenery. It was a clean slate, a new beginning. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Emily and I spent our days settling in, enjoying the peace, and building a new life together. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't exciting, but it was ours. I still think about Isabella, sometimes, how her betrayal nearly destroyed me, but it also led me here. It forced me to reevaluate everything. Without it, I wouldn't be with Emily now. Do I forgive Isabella? In some ways, yes. I've let go of the rage, but the scars remain. I can't forget what she did, but I don't let it control me anymore. Emily and I talk about the future, about simple things, nothing extravagant. Maybe a dog, maybe a garden. I don't need much anymore, just peace. And I've found that with Emily. Isabella's betrayal might have wrecked the life I thought I wanted, but it gave me the chance to create something real, something that matters. I've finally found happiness. And for the first time in a long time, I feel at peace.